Right. So you might think that metadata is just the stuff that goes in your YouTube videos or in your MP3s when you export them. But have you heard of a
Fixed character with all caps, Unicode non-compatible, Telnet compatible format that was last innovated in the 90s?
Because that's how musical artists get credit and get paid for their work. So it's kind of important. My name is Matt Kenyon, and you're listening to Composer Code. Composer Code is the podcast dedicated to demystifying the music creation process by unearthing the experiences, mistakes, and hard-won insights from some of the best video game music makers on the planet. In this extremely insightful interview with Materia Collective founder Sebastian Wolff, we discuss things like metadata, the origin story of one of the biggest collaborative video game music communities in existence, and the biggest source of revenue for Materia Collective's composers. And it's probably not what you think. Definitely took me by surprise. Oh, and I kind of make a fool out of myself trying to understand how music licensing works, so sorry about that. Thankfully, Sebastian is a gracious, patient guy who really loves to empower video game music creators, even really slow ones like me.
What drew me to video game music is sort of a roundabout story. It's one of the questions I love discussing with other composers and other professionals working in game audio, because everyone sort of has their own unique way of how they found their way into the community and the industry. For me, I didn't play a whole lot of games growing up, and N64, and played a little bit of Diddy Kong Racing and Quest 64. But ultimately what did it for me was discovering arrangements on VGmusic.com and OC Remix. And, I grew up playing piano. And so ultimately I found my way into, playing some of the piano collections from Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts. And, 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of official sheet music. And, as one does, when there is no sheet music, one makes his own.
Sure.
And that's what I did. So over the past, decade or so, I have something like 600 arranged pieces that are just transcribed and arranged for piano and a bunch of other instruments, just because there was a lack of it. And, jumping forward a couple of years, throughout college, I kept up with music studies and arranging. And then when a friend approached me whether I wanted to start a music company, I said, yes, absolutely, let's do it. And then I stepped away from that company, and now I'm running Materia Collective full time, with the goal to with one of the goals being to empower the next generation of musicians who are growing up with games right now, might have an interest in, self-expression through the music of those games, and maybe even considering games as a career, or game music as a career. So I essentially want to be one of the people there to open those doors and have those opportunities available for the folks, in the same way that I wish I had those opportunities 15 years ago.
What was it about video game music that drew you to it as opposed to other genres? You're a pianist, you could have gone in several different directions. What was so enchanting about the game music that you were playing?
Kingdom Hearts was the first franchise I really fell in love with. Yoko Shimomura's melodies are, memorable. There's a whole lot of great motivic material there. The melodies that just get stuck in your head. Yeah. After that, branching out into, Final Fantasy and Castlevania and Zelda and Mario and everything else, just sort of took its natural path. I think one of the things I enjoy most about game music now, having a much broader understanding of, the industry and the context of everything, is video game music is a very special niche, both within the music industry and sort of as an abstract concept in games. It's one of the very few things that can sort of assume its own context outside the world of games by itself.
Yeah.
So you can continuously have, the soundtrack celebrated as unique works. You have your cover song and remix and chiptune and live performance of video game music. And it doesn't really exist in similarly situated industries. Maybe a little bit in film or TV, but nothing to the extent of the game music community.
It really is. It really does stand alone as a medium in that way. I agree.
And of course, with that comes a very passionate fan community
Absolutely.
that's there to celebrate the composers and the music.
The first company that you started, you mentioned you started a company with your friend, right?
Yeah, I was one of the co-founders of a company called Loudr. Loudr was one of the first digital distribution companies that licensed cover songs, which of course was one of my big goals when I recorded covers back on YouTube. I really wanted to find a way to get them out on a larger platform. Back in the day, 2006, 2007, YouTube was the slow buffering video website that occasionally loaded all of the video.
Right.
And it was great for what it was, but there was a limited reach. So I got together with 3 other friends, and back in college we decided to found the company that would ultimately become Loudr. And through that we helped more than 20,000 artists sort of start their careers via cover songs and remixes, and doing it all legally, of course.
I want to talk a little bit more about the licensing process, because that is kind of a mysterious black box to a lot of creatives that we throw the word around, but we don't quite understand. But first, I want to ask how Materia Collective got started, and how does one go about starting a label? How does that even work? How do you say I'm going to get this thing off the ground? And also probably piggybacking on that question is, for those who may not know or fully understand, how exactly does a label work?
Oh, that's a great number of questions. Fantastic. So I would hesitate to call Materia Collective a true label, because I think the foundation of what it really is the community. Mm-hmm. In some circles, a record label is a 4-letter word, so I tend to stay away from that phrase or that brand as a thing. Materia Collective is a community of game audio professionals. We strive to make opportunities happen for composers who either might not know of the opportunities or have the resources or ability to execute on those. And then, of course, for the fan communities, we want to have those same opportunities presented to them by, furthering the reach of, what anyone might be able to do on their own. One of the big things we realized in the beginning was, by having these gigantic collaborative albums, we're able to amplify the reach of what any single one collaborator might be able to accomplish.
Right.
So teamwork and all that. How Materia Collective got started is really interesting. So at E3 in 2015, when they announced the Final Fantasy VII remake, I was still employed full time at the company at Loudr beforehand. When I saw the announcement and saw the trailer and, joined the rest of the internet and being thoroughly ecstatic about the entire concept. And one day, of course, it will be released in full. But I made a post on Facebook, very casual. Hey, I saw Final Fantasy VII is getting a remake. Is anyone else interested in potentially joining me on a small remix project? Do a few covers that celebrates the music. We ended up with 192 artists that joined for this project, our debut project called Materia. About 5.5 hours of music, 87 tracks, 5 discs. And that sort of set the pace for Materia Collective as a whole. It was featured around the internet, got a ton of acclaim, featured a whole range of talent, and as before mentioned, 192 artists who all played and arranged and orchestrated and sang and wrote lyrics for, and so on. And from that moment on, the community was born. And after the project came out, we sat around and said, okay, let's do it again. That was fun. And we followed Materia in its footsteps with successor of Final Fantasy VIII album. And since then, we've released about a dozen other community projects and over 50 other original soundtracks and independent remix albums and cover albums that other artists from the game audio community have produced.
So what does it look like for you to manage Materia Collective from day to day? Is it a spreadsheet? Doesn't it all boil down to that? Everything. It's all spreadsheets.
It's spreadsheets all the way down.
So when you talk about, you mentioned that it's all about amplifying some of the work of independent collaborators, connecting them with opportunities and opening doors that they may not be able to open themselves. Can you maybe give an example of what that might look like for an artist who joins Materia Collective? And also, if you want to talk about your day-to-day work there too, I think that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle both of those. I mean, from the day-to-day perspective, back when we started Loudr in 2009, one of the things I really enjoyed was how, like in the startup culture and in the early stages of a company, how every day offers essentially a new puzzle, a new opportunity to solve something or create something new and cool. There's very little consistency from day to day in terms of, the fires that need to be put out or the opportunities that present that might expire in 24 hours, or even just, down to doing all the stuff that comes along with running a business, bookkeeping and payments and ordering supplies and boxes and shipping and research and opportunities and all of those other things. So no single day is the same. And I think that's what I really enjoy about, being at Materia Collective. Right now, the day-to-day is a lot of spreadsheets. So I built my own custom content management tool to handle the mountains and mountains of metadata that comes along with the music industry, as well as finding a way to route all the royalties collectively and correctly. One of the big tenets we have is to ensure that the right people get paid and get paid on time. And then sort of what is presented on social media scratches the surface of what actually happens behind the scenes. I enjoy placing my artists into the spotlight rather than taking that up myself. So it's really, really cool to see, artists' careers take off.
Yeah, you seem like just from our conversation, you seem like a really humble guy who just wants to empower other people, and I could be wrong about that, but that's just my first impression.
Thank you.
As we're talking,
I hope to embody that, of course, but I think that attitude is required when working in the game audio industry. Mm-hmm. It's funny comparing it to, say, the film or TV communities, where it, from what I've heard and have people tell me, is that it tends to be much more competitive rather than collaborative.
Yes. So
I'm based in Seattle, and we have a fantastic indie game development scene, as well as a big AAA community here. So, we have weekly meetups for indie game developers. We have weekly meetups for game audio professionals. And it's very collaborative. At the end of the day, we're all nerds making really cool things happen for an interactive medium that millions of people will enjoy. So there's plenty of opportunities to go around, and I think all learning together and growing together has to be one of the tenets of anyone working professionally in this field. I wouldn't describe myself as an engineer. I'm passionate enough about code to go ahead and build a custom system that gets the job done. But that's sort of where the love for pull requests ends. I'm passionate about what it accomplishes, right?
Right. Yeah.
The big thing that we learned at Loudr, even in the early days, was that you have to account for edge cases. And what I mean by that is that the music industry is filled with inconsistencies and incongruencies. Many aspects of the music industry are technophobic. They fear innovation. They fear, the internet as a whole. Sure. There's a metadata exchange format that rights holders and publishing companies use to exchange information. It's a for the technical nerds out there, it is a fixed character with all caps, Unicode non-compatible, Telnet compatible format that was last innovated in the 90s.
Gotcha.
And, that is still the most modern advancement of metadata exchange in 2018.
Wow.
it's fascinating, really. So when you hear about people complaining that they're not getting paid or not getting the royalties that they deserve, it's largely due to the fact that you have many decision makers who fear innovation and change to the degree that they will not invest in forward-thinking technology. So yes, backing up, Loudr tends to be the sort of opposite of that, where we realized early on that we needed a fascinatingly fast and complex tech stack to really accomplish like what needed to be done in the industry.
Sure.
And given that there are so many nuances about music and licensing and royalties and rights, especially on an international level, there's no solution other than a custom one that can be built to really accommodate all of those, edge cases. So when I built the Materia dashboard, it's a custom content management tool that I hope to make public for Materia's artists later this year, so that everyone can log in and see their sales and stats and update their artist profile and get tips on how better to improve aspects of their online identity, all such things. So when I built it, it was with the edge cases in mind, and that has really really been beneficial when receiving royalty reports and statements and all that other boring stuff.
Can you give just a brief primer on what the role of metadata is in the artist sort of getting compensated for their work? Because the only experience that I personally have of metadata is like YouTube metadata, for example, or metadata when I export a song that's an MP3, and I want to give a piece of software like iTunes information about it. That's my extent of that knowledge. Can you maybe just briefly explain how metadata works to help artists get paid?
Oh, absolutely. Metadata is the lifeblood of the new music industry. It's absolutely essential. It has to be the cornerstone of anyone working in the music industry has to understand its importance. Part of the reason is, of course, track identification, composition identification. If you have an MP3 that's an audio recording, there's a composition aspect. Who wrote it? Where did they write it? When was it first published? In what country did they record it? What is the citizenship or nationality of the composer? Are there more composers? Are they affiliated with a PRO, a performing rights organization like ASCAP? Do they have a publisher? Where's the publisher located? What is their information? How can we contact the publisher? All of that information is absolutely vital when a song plays on Spotify, that Spotify knows where to get a license and who to pay. And the onus is really on the music industry, the labels and the publishers, to provide as much information as possible, because without it, if you have Main Theme by Koji Kondo, that's not going to help anyone identify the specific composition.
Sure.
You might know that it is maybe Nintendo, but Koji Kondo wrote a lot of main themes.
What would you recommend artists who are totally green in that area to do to make sure that they at least have a rudimentary grasp of metadata enough to make sure that they're compensated?
Well, I think the better piece of advice would be to give artists an understanding of the importance of knowing at least a baseline of music industry and its practices. Metadata is, of course, a big part of that.
Yeah.
But I firmly believe that any artist working in the music industry or the game industry creating music has to know fundamentary basics of, music law, music copyright, music business, just to sort of have that surface understanding of like, oh, these are the important factors and this is how I get paid. I do have a blog post where I have outlined a couple of books that I suggest. I'm happy to send that to you as well.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. That was my next question. I'll make sure to put that in the description of this episode. How does an organization like Materia Collective stay running? Obviously you got bills to pay. How does that work? How do you make money? How do you what other things do you do? Maybe specifically besides connecting other artists for collaborations?
There's one thing that always disappoints me, especially in video game music, and that is sort of like seeing opportunities and potential just come and pass by.
Mm-hmm.
Especially someone who has a slightly more in-depth understanding of the opportunities that do exist.
Right.
So, as you're watching sort of these opportunities come and flow by, now through Materia Collective, because we have, over 600 people in the Facebook group. So we do have a fairly decent reach into the community, both the fan community and the professional community. So by seeing a lot of those opportunities come, we're able to pick up on some of them and say, hey, here's a cool project that I think we could do that, fans will like, that maybe even the original composer might endorse or be a fan of. The latest one is actually, we're working together with Lena Raine, the composer for Celeste.
Oh, yeah.
A phenomenal indie game and indie soundtrack that came out. If you like platformers, similar to Super Meat Boy in terms of challenging potential.
Right.
Very, very polished, beautiful music, great storyline. I can't gush enough about this game and the music. But
I keep seeing the name of the game thrown around, so I definitely need to check it out and listen to the soundtrack at least.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's on Bandcamp and Spotify and everywhere. But we're working together with Lena Raine, the composer, and Trevor Allen Gomez, a pianist and arranger, to put together an official Celeste piano collection. So that's an opportunity that came by. I saw the game come out, and thankfully Lena Raine was also in Seattle, and we got to meet up and have coffee and gush about sheet music and projects. And from then on, we basically said, yeah, let's do it. So
that's awesome.
There's an example of seeing like this would be a really cool project, from Materia Collective's end. We're willing to invest a little bit of cash for the recording, upfronting, expenses for, printing books and mailing those around the world to fans who might be into it. We're willing to take a risk for a project, by bringing it out to life, bringing a physical product into the world that, might be successful, might not be successful, but
right.
I see more of the success in terms of, are there going to be people who connect with it and find it important enough to support?
When you were talking, I was reminded of a venture capitalist firm who they take a risk by investing in organizations. And the idea is that they get a return on their investment by assessing the risks and saying, I think this is a good investment. I believe in this company. Would it be safe to say that Materia Collective is similar in some sense, where you see an artist or you see a collaboration opportunity and you invest in that opportunity kind of as a sign of faith that I believe this will be, a powerful piece of art. And when you do that, I'm curious, how it works with Materia Collective getting paid and the artist getting paid, and how does that all break down?
That's an interesting comparison. It actually took me far too long to make that connection. I have familiarity with venture capitalists. I've been an investor myself, and of course also on the producing part of the startup and creating a company with a board and investors and all that. It took me far too long to understand that what record labels are, in the traditional sense, are essentially investment firms. They see talent that they think they can bring to a new level through resources or marketing or tutelage or even just throwing money at marketing and hoping that it's a return of investment for everyone and that the artist does well enough to get to that new level. In a way, that is how I'm approaching Materia Collective. I'm not as risk averse as probably larger venture capitalist firms would prefer.
Right.
But then again, if we have 2 out of 10 projects make their money back and more, then we can have more projects that we support and bring to life.
Sure. Yeah.
Of course, on a financial level, we recoup our upfront investments and then take a small percentage of all the money that comes in after that. We prefer that the artists get the bulk share of any money that is made. we offer a service that's a little bit more than just distribution. We have a brand, we have support, we have a community that is all behind it. And I think more than anything, we have the tool set and the knowledge to support the artists along the way.
When you're kind of talking to an artist and maybe giving them counsel, and they're saying, I want to be the wisest I can with my resources, where should I go? Where do you guys see the most traction as far as sales and revenue and that sort of thing?
Oh, goodness. When you find that magic formula that works for all artists, you let me know right away.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, I figured if it was that easy, right?
Right. Traction. So we're both the rights administrator, the publisher, and the distributor for the Untitled soundtrack outside Bandcamp. Honestly, Spotify accounts for most of the revenue that comes in.
Gotcha.
Alongside Apple Music. So it would be foolish to say that streaming is negligible. Maybe 5 years ago it accounted for 15-20%.
Yeah.
Right now it's more than 50%.
Wow.
Especially for the demographics that will be shaping the next decade of music. It's always so funny, there's no shortage of technophobic writing online that says, Spotify is literally the devil.
Sure.
And it's whatever you think of their corporate tactics or whatever, I think it's a fantastic company, and I think they're doing right by artists.
That's really well. Obviously you're in the industry, so I definitely trust you more than a keyboard warrior on a blog.
Keyboard warrior, I like that.
Yeah. So that's good.
It's true. I mean, there's no shortage of companies that focus on the bottom line rather than building a sustainable business model.
Mm-hmm.
I think Spotify is great. I think Apple Music and iTunes are great.
Yeah.
Tidal is a fantastic company. I like that they, stream, 9648 quality tracks. It sounds better than anything. It's phenomenal. And I think as with everything, streaming works at scale. If you have an audience that wants to listen to their music, they will go and listen to your music. Versus as before, you buy a CD, you listen to it, and if you don't like it, you don't listen to it anymore.
Sure.
And the whole golden age of the music industry, I mean, it's gone, but there's a new golden age coming, and I hope that those who fear it will catch up and join us in innovating a nice future.
What is the golden age you're describing? Can you talk a little more about that? About kind of what you see in the future? It's a
change of tactic, right? I mean, I see sort of two directions. I mean, one is, of course, there's a lot of opportunity in streaming. I think on a larger scale, digital downloads will go away in the next 5 years. I would be shocked if iTunes is still selling MP3s or M4As or whatever. I think everything will be consolidated into an access model, much in the same way that, you don't go to Blockbuster anymore to rent VHS.
Right. You
now go to Netflix and get your membership.
Sure.
But, then you also have to go to Amazon Prime and get your membership, and Hulu didn't get your membership, and then to Disney and get your membership.
Right.
So my hope is that won't translate to the music industry.
Yeah.
We're talking about like the musical panopticon, where you go to one platform and you pay your monthly price and you get all the music that you want, the buffet option of music.
Sure. Yeah. So when
I think that's within reach. I think that's within reach on, sort of the one side of things. But then, as buying digital music has fallen out of vogue, other than for the explicit reason of knowing that you're supporting an artist directly, as on Bandcamp, it has become more popular to have physical collectibles. Vinyl is back, not necessarily because I think people enjoy it for the audiophile quality. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of monitors and speakers and vinyl players that do replicate that, but on the mass consumer market, it is a collectible item. I have a ton of vinyl. The Super Hexagon vinyl by Chipsol that I'm 8-bit produced. It's an actual hexagonal.
I'm not sure.
It has
hexagonal.
It has 6 sides.
Sounds cooler.
They actually cut
it's
it.
a record. It's a record that's
It's a
hexagonal?
record.
That's amazing.
It's hexagonal. It's a beautiful piece. And that hangs on the wall. You know, I can go on Bandcamp and Spotify and listen to Chipsel and buy her album again, but I like it as a collector's item. You know, you get it signed, it sits on the bookshelf, it looks pretty. In the same way that, you know, we're selling a ton of CDs. We're shipping out a couple of hundred CDs every month. You know, we still have Hero of Time, we have Nier, we have Sins of Hyrule, and more CDs are coming in. So it's more of, you know, outside the US, we still have a massive CD consumer market, which I think is here to stay.
Yeah.
But not necessarily for, you know, having your digital media in the form of a piece of plastic, but rather like, oh, I bought this, I supported it, it looks great, it feels premium, it's a beautiful product, right?
And that kind of that it's funny you mentioned that, because when I was listening to Hero of Time, which by the way is breathtaking. I mean, I have no other way to describe it. It is, I think it is the definitive Ocarina of Time. The official, unofficial Ocarina of Time soundtrack. I mean, for something that's not sanctioned by Nintendo, it is, or at least not produced by Nintendo, it is just as good. It is. I mean, it is really good, man. So
that's a true honor.
I want to praise that.
That was all Eric Buckles. My goodness.
Yeah, I noticed his name, and I was going to ask about Hero of Time, but I also noticed that you have some really beautiful physical products, and it kind of piggybacks on what you were just saying. Do you find that is a successful revenue generating model, that fans are kind of getting into that? Because I see obviously sold out, you know, right on the Bandcamp there. So something that
we had a limited, so Hero of Time was kickstarted with the generous support of about 1,000 backers on Kickstarter, and then more, you know, pre-orders of course came in, so we were able to do a super premium production with gold plate and slip disc covers for the whole digipack experience. I mean, given that we won't be producing, you know, 500,000 CDs and be able to sell them, we'd rather focus on something smaller that's premium that fans might enjoy. You know, double the production and manufacturing costs, and, you know, hope we break even if we sell, you know, 60%.
Sure.
But for things like that, it's, you know, it's not really about, you know, we're going to retire on, you know, the income from video game music. You know, the shining light has to be, you know, how do we create something cool for fans? I mean, yes, it pays the bills to a certain degree, but, you know, we'd rather take a tiny percentage from, you know, a lot of projects, you know, share that revenue with creators and composers and make sure that, you know, they're taken care of first.
So, and I'm so tempted to buy the CD right now because I see that I can get the compact disc, and after talking, I'm just picturing it displayed on my desk, and I want it, you know, just for that reason, kind of like you talked about. It's not necessarily because of the audio files that people buy the records, but it is a collector's, you know, it's a collector's item. And that sort of reframed it in my mind, where I'm like, yeah, that would look awesome on my desk, and it would be really cool to display that. And but shifting gears a little bit, that's really, really awesome information. But Steven, our mutual friend, he mentioned something, and I do hope I'm not misquoting him here, but he mentioned something that you've done, or you mentioned that you've done a ton for the video game music community, which just by our conversation, I can tell that you have.
Thank you.
By also making it legal to publish sheet music arrangements of video game songs. Now, I could be totally speaking out of turn here, but can you maybe talk a little bit about, maybe unpack what he's talking about, and also why is it such a big deal with, for example, he linked me to the Undertale arrangements. You know, why is it such a big deal that arrangers can now sell that, and what was it prior that prohibited them from doing that?
I think for context, the video game music, or the video game world, has a very limited understanding of the music industry and all the rights and licenses and the publishing practices and how the rights management works. There's just an insufficiency in information that's available and accessible.
Sure.
You know, in most AAA companies, in those cases, you hire a composer, They produce the music, you implement the music, and that is the end of the life cycle. Thanks to the efforts of Something Else Music Works, a phenomenal, AAA video game music label. They're based in New York, started by Roger Nelson, a legend, and it's a fantastic team over there too. They started producing CDs in the early days. I know they were the first to say, hey, approach Bungie and Microsoft, 343 and all those folks and say, hey, let's press Halo on CDs. And that took off. And I think through that and potentially some of the efforts that I put into Loudr and making video game music distribution possible, there is now at least an awareness that, hey, the music that exists in games, people do want to listen to it somewhere else.
Sure.
And maybe in an official capacity that's not, a YouTube rip from the game.
Right.
So, I mean, as a tangent, I firmly believe that piracy is an accessibility problem. You wouldn't, 9 times out of 10, I think fans will prefer to obtain something legally that's official and has a stamp of approval, rather than something that they download from a forum somewhere or find on YouTube. So it's all about making it accessible and convenient, and I think that's honestly why Steam is such a successful story, because they made it super easy for game developers to publish their stuff and super easy for fans to buy it.
Right.
At least that's my perception of it.
Yeah, that's a really. I mean, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. So, going back to the original point about sheet music, there's a very limited understanding of the rights that need to be managed and how those can be, further exploited is the legal term. Like basically do cool things with it. So we have a really nice partnership with Sheet Music Plus. They're a Hal Leonard company, and Hal Leonard's one of the big 2 sheet music publishers in the US. So Materia Collective has a publishing division that basically helps composers manage their rights, register the copyrights, help, cover song licensing, help, if there's a concert that happens, we help negotiate the rights and royalties. Like I said, spreadsheets forever, right?
Right, yeah.
But the deal with Sheet Music Plus is that we have sent them our catalog, and every time we sign a new composer, we continue sending them new updates to the catalog. So, for example, you can, as an arranger, you can go on Sheet Music Plus and say, hey, I want to arrange a string quartet version of Megalovania from Undertale and sell it directly on Sheet Music Plus. And you can do that right now.
Wow.
And it is basically the cover song licensing version for sheet music. And given how many tens of thousands of arrangements that exist in the video game music world, why not make it official and licensable? I mean, we don't want to compete with, any of the content that fans have put up on MuseScore. I mean, ideally you don't sell it without getting a license, but, it's peanuts.
Sure.
I think it's more about, elevating the video game music fan community from sort of an underground forum experience to this is official, you can publish it, it can be legal, it can, composers can get paid for their work, basically catching up with the trends of the music industry as a whole.
So and you may have touched on this, I'm sorry, I'm trying to comprehend everything. Sure. How does Sheet Music Plus function in collaboration or in tandem with Nintendo, and what is it about the process on Sheet Music Plus that makes it legal for someone to sell their arrangement that maybe they couldn't before? I may have missed that.
Well, Nintendo's its own story. Right now we only send Sheet Music Plus the catalog that we administrate. So we have around 800 songs that a ton of indie composers have written. That have come, and they have come to us and said, hey, I would like you to manage my publishing. So Materia Collective takes care of the royalty collection, song registration, and sending the catalogs to Sheet Music Plus. So what happens if fans sign up for Sheet Music Plus and publish their arrangements, Sheet Music Plus says, oh, it's this song, I will pay Materia Collective, and then Materia Collective will pay its composers.
I see. So how does it work? Yeah, Nintendo. I was going to ask about that. How is that? That sounds like there's a story behind that.
Well, we don't yet work directly with Nintendo and help them manage their publishing rights. I do hope that one day Nintendo will be working with any music publisher to help them further understand the music industry.
Because they're notoriously pretty strict, right, about music licensing and things like that.
Yes, Nintendo Japan, for example, has a very I hesitated. They care very much about how their intellectual property is used and presented, which is understandable
Well
given
put.
that,
Well put. And I can always edit anything
they are the
out
kings.
of this, so just FYI.
Appreciate it. But no, I mean, Nintendo's obviously doing something right. I mean, you look at 2017 for them, and I wish I had more time to play my Switch. I've yet to download Mario Odyssey.
Sure.
But it's the kind of, it captures. They've succeeded in recapturing the interest and attention and passion and excitement for a very specific set of gamers.
Right.
Through the Switch and the console and the other games they're putting out right now. So they're obviously doing something right in terms of how they perceive value.
Yeah.
And how they curate how that value is used by other professionals and fans alike.
Sure.
So
I think a lot of it too boils down to they just are very particular about their brand and their intellectual property and how it's perceived. And they just want to have really tight control over every aspect of sort of the Nintendo universe. Would you say that's your experience as well?
To a large part, yes. I've talked with many people at Nintendo America. I know of certain conversations that happen between Nintendo America and Nintendo Japan. And as far as I know, there is some movement happening in, innovating on the music side of things. For example, I would love, after Hero of Time, it was a complete runaway hit, right? But we did record with a live orchestra. The disclaimer is that, of course, it's not sanctioned by Nintendo, but Nintendo is getting paid for every copy that's sold.
Gotcha.
But after that success, how do we follow that up? I would love to work on a Wind Waker album, for example.
Yes.
Focus more on strings and choir and woodwinds and
love the Wind Waker soundtrack. Personally,
what a great soundtrack, right?
Very good.
But in order to cover some of the songs from Wind Waker, we would have to negotiate directly with Nintendo, and I'm not sure that that's a conversation they might be ready to have yet.
Gotcha.
So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited to work with them a bit closer in the future.
I think just the fact that you are having those conversations and that Nintendo's having those conversations with you is an incredibly encouraging thing, that they are talking through the possibility of doing things like that. So just so that I understand and our listeners understand, to recap, for the Sheet Music Plus, I'm sorry to beat this dead horse. I'm trying to understand it.
No, totally. It's a bit confusing.
I know. So you go to an organization that has produced a game soundtrack, like Nintendo, for example, and you come up with a deal or some sort of contract that says that any sales of this sheet music percentage will go to that company, and then you manage the collection of those royalties that the artists themselves in Materia Collective create. I'm sorry, I'm kind of confusing myself.
Let me try again.
No, dude, this is my fault. I'm sorry. I'm trying so hard to get it.
No, it's no fault of yours. The music industry and its licensing schemes are vastly complex, and I mean, I'm still learning a lot of these things. So what happens for Materia's publishing agreements is, if you're an indie composer who has retained his or her or their rights, we get to help them administrate those rights. So if you wrote a song called Main Theme, and you come to us and say, hey, I would like you to help administrate, main theme for me, we say, okay, great. And then we say, okay, every time, the song plays on Spotify, we want to make sure that you get paid for main theme.
Mm-hmm.
If someone wants to do an arrangement and publish sheet music of it through Sheet Music Plus, we make sure that you get paid for that.
Yeah.
If someone wants to record a cover of main theme, they come to us and we grant them a license for it.
Gotcha.
So we essentially become the rights administrator for main theme for you, so you don't have to deal with it, and so that we can have more opportunities to bring main theme to everyone else who might be, enthralled with the game or you or the song itself.
And so when you say main theme, are you referring to like an original piece? Like, what if I wanted to say I want to do an arrangement of the Super Mario 64 main theme? What, how would that work? Or would it work?
Well, that wouldn't work.
Gotcha.
Mainly because you wouldn't be the composer of that song.
Right.
And we only work with a composer of songs, or the rights holders in the case it's a buyout, right? So I think the important thing to touch on as well is that there are two copyrights. You have a composition, where you have all the notes and your thematic material and maybe even instrumentation. Mm-hmm. And then you have the recording of that song. And those are two separate rights.
I see.
And what we help administrate is the composition itself. So, for example, if you have sheet music of that composition, we help administrate that.
I see.
Now, if Nintendo wanted to come to us and say, hey, we would like for you to help other fans legally distribute sheet music of, the Super Mario Bros. Main theme, that would be fantastic. But if you wanted to come to us and say, hey, I want to sell sheet music of that, we would have to go to Nintendo and ask. And, well, that's for another time.
I see. Yeah. So how exactly, just to wrap this up, I'm curious, how did it work with Hero of Time? Like, what was the process for you guys in clearing that?
Well, sheet music and cover song rights are very separate.
Okay.
So we worked with Loudr, who has an established relationship with Nintendo. Loudr, again, is the old music company that I worked at.
Right.
They did cover song licensing almost exclusively. So we went to them and said, hey, we need licenses for these 30 songs. And they said, okay, here you go.
Gotcha.
And then we paid the licensing, the royalties, and Nintendo, has been receiving very large checks from us.
Gotcha. Okay. I see. So is that usually when you go to Loudr and you ask for the rights to those cover songs, is it usually a pretty large percentage that goes back to the original composer?
It's in the US, it's government mandated, so it's about 10 cents per cover.
Gotcha. Okay. I see.
It's a bit more for longer songs, but those are all honestly details. But
I see.
As with Spotify, you have very small royalties, but if you get 100,000 streams, it does add up. And if you sell a few hundred CDs or a few thousand vinyl, it does add up, right?
Thank you so much for taking the time to explain that.
Right. And I mean, now that you've said that, imagine how much more of an education there has to be for the people working in the field, right?
Sure.
And that's honestly one of the things I would love to work on. I'm hoping to publish a small pamphlet, music rights for the game industry professional.
Absolutely. If you ever had a course like on Udemy or something, I would totally buy that in a heartbeat.
It's in the works.
Like a video. Oh, it's in the works?
It's in the works.
Awesome. Okay.
It is overdue.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'll be keeping my eye out for that. So that kind of segues well into the next question that I had, and that is, I think a lot of composers who want to break into the video game composition, kind of shifting gears to the composers who want to write original music for original games are a little nervous because they've heard horror stories about getting taken advantage of, and they don't want to get taken advantage of. They want to make sure they're protected. So what's some advice that you would offer to young composers maybe getting their first gig to make sure that they are protected and also properly compensated for any work they do on a game? Like what sort of preparatory steps, I guess, would you recommend for those people before they kind of hit the pavement and try to get their first gig?
One of the things I always tell people, if you're given a contract, have a trusted friend read over it, preferably someone who has worked with licensing and agreements before. If you can afford it, work with an attorney.
Yeah.
And my thing is always, you can afford it because you can't afford not to work with an attorney.
Right.
So say, for example, you write music for a small indie game and they give you a contract and you just sign it over, and then that game becomes, say, Minecraft.
Yeah, right.
And, if it's an indie game, I know a lot of composers who negotiate for a percentage of sales, for a reduced rate, or they get to keep their music rights and sell the soundtrack separately, or they get to do a number of things, right? If it's a small game in a small studio, many studios tend to be much more approachable. There's a Facebook group called Business Skills for Composers.
Yes,
I would
Steven
absolutely recommend.
Me on to that.
Great. So I'm one of the administrators there, alongside a few other mods who have vast industry experience. I'm quite humbled to be in the group. But I would absolutely join that group. It has a wealth of information that's just freely given away. So I would recommend joining that before anything, and just basically doing homework and reading. Knowing that sometimes it's totally fine to step away from a deal is important, and knowing that everything is negotiable is also important.
Do you think that, well, another thing is that I wanted to touch on is, I've heard the terms licensing and royalty sharing and sort of getting a percentage of the game sales, as well as like a buyout. People have talked about buyouts, and a lot of these terms are sort of get conflated in my mind. Would you be able to just sort of break down from your experience what a license looks like, what the you already kind of touched on what the game's percentage, what exact, I'm not sure what that would be called when you get a percentage of the game every time it's sold, and then what a buyout would be. And you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, but maybe the pros and cons of each of those.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's probably more complex than I can fit into a minute, but I would definitely recommend checking out the Facebook group, which has paragraphs and paragraphs of information.
Awesome.
Licensing, licensing is sort of an umbrella term for two or more parties have an agreement, and this is what they agree to, and it has signatures at the bottom, right? So if I say, I'm going to write 10 minutes of music for you, for, $10,000, and you will pay me within 2 weeks of it being approved and completed, and you get to revise it 2 times, and you sign it and I sign it, then we have agreed to it, and that is a license agreement.
Right.
Is it legally binding? Does it cover all the edge cases? Can I submit it to Content ID? No, of course not. But no one really wants to write or read, your standard 50-page license agreements that are common in, film or larger AAA budgets.
Sure.
So license, if I'm granting you a license for something, you get to do the thing that I give you the license for.
Right.
Buyout in a traditional sense is all work for hire. So rather than a license for you to use the thing that I have created, my intellectual property, you get all rights, all ownership, all everything for that. And usually contracts like that stipulate that, of course, I have to be credited if I'm creating a thing for you.
But the music is ostensibly theirs to do with whatever they want.
whatever they want.
Gotcha.
In the strictest sense of a buyout, it gets very complicated with performing rights organizations who stipulate that as the composer, you still get to retain certain royalties.
Sure.
Which gets very fuzzy because PROs are largely a holdover from a previous era of music, and it doesn't really fit nicely into the interactive spectrum.
Gotcha.
But that's sort of what it is. In terms of rates, goodness, I've seen everything from, well, it's free, to, well, my rate is $2,500 a minute, to I will write a song for $6,000. And I mean, the ceiling is basically whatever people think your music is worth and what they're able and willing to pay for, right?
Sure.
And like I said, everything is negotiable. Of course, there are trends. An indie rate for music is probably 3 digits, but it's also getting up there. But then again, some studios might not have an audio budget for $10,000 to give to a composer and audio team, and might say, hey, would you be willing to consider a reduced rate, but you get 10% of the net profits for the game?
Sure.
So some composers like that, some composers don't,
Which is kind of like playing the long game, I suspect, where it's kind of you are sort of taking a risk that less money up front, but hopefully if it is a Minecraft, or it is a another indie game that's sort of taken off, Hotline Miami or whatever, what have you, you're essentially playing the long game. It's more of an investment, would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, as with any investment, 10% of zero is, 0.
Sure.
Or
sure.
10% of a multi-million-dollar franchise is a retirement, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Most of it is a little bit closer to the 0 mark, a couple of hundreds here and there. But, occasionally you might have that runaway success. So in those scenarios, I usually encourage composers to vet the team. If they have a ship title, great. If not, not only evaluate the artistic and creative properties, but also, are they able to ship a game and make sure that it does well, right?
Right.
Is it commercial enough for it to be financially feasible for me to not work for any upfront and instead get just a royalty?
It's really interesting. It's a lot of it, like we talked about, how Materia Collective is very much like a venture capitalist firm where you're assessing the investment. And if I want to invest my resources in this person, as a composer, you kind of need to be sort of assessing the team. Are they organized? Do they ship games? Do they have a bad track record of 5 canceled games? That would definitely color, whether you want to work with them or not. So I think that's really valuable. Sebastian, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for talking to me tonight. I just want to close with 2 questions, and one is a very light question. We've been deep in the weeds of business stuff, so I just want to ask what your favorite game is and your favorite game soundtrack. I have a feeling I know what it is because you mentioned it earlier. And also...
These are the 2 hardest questions already.
Yes, that's right. I was thinking, if someone asked me, I don't know that I would know. I like Sonic, I like Mario, I have no idea. And the second is, if someone wants to join Materia Collective or find out more about Materia Collective, where should they go?
Well, for the first one, I can't name a single favorite game or soundtrack. I usually have seasonal soundtracks or just music that floats past.
Sure.
Right now I'm listening to Jessica Curry's So Let Us Melt.
I don't think I've heard of that.
Jessica Curry, she's a UK composer. She did Dear Esther, Everyone's Gone to the Rapture.
Oh, wow.
Couple of other things. Really gorgeous music, a lot of choir work.
I will definitely check that out and put a link to her work in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me send you a direct link to her Bandcamp. I think everything is up there.
Perfect.
In terms of favorite games, it's somewhere between Breath of the Wild, because I can pick it up and cook a few meals and put it back down.
Yes, exactly. Yes, you can.
And then if I want to be completely irresponsible and, lose track of about 3 hours, Horizon Zero Dawn, because it's just immaculate, it's pretty, it's vast, the storytelling is fantastic, the narrative is gorgeous, and the music's just phenomenal. I'm at the point where I have to very much curate my time of, gameplay experiences. I miss passively consuming content without having really a, regard for the time.
Right.
But it was funny, Materia is almost 3 years old now, and at the beginning I said, oh, I'm going to start a video game company. I'm going to have so much time to play video games.
Right. Nope. Doesn't work out that way.
Doesn't work that way. But yeah, I'm very happy for every moment that I have that I can squeeze in a little bit of time.
That's awesome.
And, still keep up with, all the innovation and the cool things developers and publishers are putting out.
That is really cool. So where can people go? Yeah, where can people go to find more about Materia Collective and maybe even join?
Materia Collective right now, the community aspect is on Discord.
Okay.
And there's a public join link. I'm happy to send that your way as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on a bit more private Facebook group. Right now, it's invite only, or we have a referral network. But honestly, any composer or would-be composer who has some work that they're able to show, we'd be happy to have a look over their work. We're still trying to figure out exactly the membership guidelines, but so far it is pretty loose because we want to be there as a support network. But at the same time, we're a professional audio community that works on projects together and helps each other's reach greater heights.
Wow. I really hope you guys enjoyed that interview as much as I did. All the resources that Sebastian mentioned in the talk will be linked in the description below, including his industry reading list, the soundtrack he's currently listening to, more information about Materia Collective, and the very helpful Business Skills for Composers Facebook group. The biggest takeaway that I got from this is if you're looking to break into the industry of composing for games, you got to be an investor. You need to survey the developers that want to hire you or that you want to work for and really assess whether you're going to get a good return on investment. I think that mindset is extremely important, especially when there's money changing hands and dollars on the line. Well, anyway, until next time, guys, thanks for listening.